Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for joining.
Thank you
Small
for
group
having
here
us.
today, but this will be good. We are going to record this so that those who couldn't make it, there were quite a few I know that wanted to be here today but couldn't. This is just going to be an introductory class today as well. Let me just jump into this. This is kind of built off of a class that we did 2 years ago. Ramin Rahatsad, our executive secretary, and wonderful brother and dear friend, led a class here and at Bilal, a masjid over in Beaverton, for about 2 years, on this book right here, which is entitled Being Muslim, written by a scholar down in the Bay Area, Asad Tarsim, wonderful brother. And it's a very comprehensive text in the English language for someone who's wanting to learn the basic fundamentals of Islam. It covers everything across the board. So it's very good as a fundamental text. We're only going to actually be covering probably about 3 chapters from this nearly 300-page book. So if people are interested in pursuing more of this after Ramadan, then I think that's something that we would definitely be looking at encouraging. So this is our English text for the class, and I've got a printout here of the Arabic text. This is the Matan al-Ashmawiyah, which is a introductory beginning level text in the Maliki madhab, which we'll go into all of that a little bit more. So, yeah, class over. Here we go. I've divided this up into 4 classes. Today we're just going to cover the introductory material, which is the foundations. What is an Islamic science? What is fiqh? And what we should be kind of knowing as the foundational terminology going into this kind of overview. And then next week, we'll actually start looking at the texts themselves for the most part. Come on in, brother. And we will be studying next week the purification, the tahara, which covers wudu, it covers types of water, covers the ghusl, the bath, tayammum, a few other things as well. So that'll be next week's topic. And then the following week, we'll look at the salah, the prayer. What is the important obligations for that, for it to be valid. And then the week following, we'll look at fasting, and that'll be right before Ramadan begins. And then inshallah, if there's people that are interested, on Saturday, I believe it'll be April 2nd, it's going to be the 29th of Sha'ban. So we're going to probably try to get a group together to go out to the gorge and see if we can sight the crescent, the hilal, for Ramadan, inshallah. So but we'll look at that more as the date approaches us. We got a couple weeks to go still. So yeah, as I was saying, our text is the Arabic text, Matan al-Ashmawiyah. I have an English translation along with the Arabic here. If anyone wants it, I'll actually have you guys take this and pass it around, and I can get copies printed off for next week. And then if anyone is interested in actually getting a copy of the Being Muslim text, this is an overview text. We're only going to be covering probably about 3 chapters from it, but it's a very good basic primer in the English language for all things Islam. I will have these available. You can donate some if you want. I'll have them, but just let me know so I can get an order in for those. So if you want to just put your name down and which copy you would like, and we'll go from there.
Do you know if they have that book on Audible?
It's a great question. I don't know, but I will find out. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, excellent. It's likely, but I'm not 100% certain, so I'll get back to you on that.
I can check right now if you want.
Go, by all means, go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, yeah, I'm going to jump right in. What is knowledge, and what is its purpose? Anyone want to speculate as to the answer of that?
It is not.
Knowledge, and what is its purpose?
I can contribute something.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think knowledge is like the accumulation of experience, like written or described in a text or something. And the purpose of that knowledge
Just let's sit down.
is to help others not to repeat the same mistakes, or to help them to get to their goals faster than just be experimenting from scratch.
Yeah.
That's how I think about
That's
it.
great. That's great. I really like that. Does anyone else have a definition to knowledge and its purpose?
To raise humanity, to raise and better humankind. The way we see each other, it brings forth compassion, empathy, to know another side of things that you may not know otherwise. It also, the more knowledge you know, the less you know. It breeds curiosity.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with Sister Elizabeth, what she said about the more you know, the more you know how you don't know. So I would say knowledge is learning things that you don't know. But in my opinion, the most important thing is to know about God. So the knowledge of God. And what its purpose, I would say, to make us be better people and live a better life.
And also, it brings us closer to truth, or a truth.
Oh, yeah.
Can I say something before we start? Can we have like a little introduction? People introduce themselves.
Let's save that actually for the after, just because there's people online that will be able to be involved in that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'll actually do a little bit of introduction to myself. My name is Tim, Tim Brinke, for those of you who don't know me. Board member here at MCCP. I had the honor to get to do a class on the Arabic text here earlier this year with some scholars based in Cairo that teach teachers of Al-Azhar. So it was a very, very special privilege. I'm honored to be able to be part of it. This is one of the questions that they asked us at the onset, basically day one. And part of it wasn't just to get an answer from you, it was more just to help you in setting your intentions. Because intentions are very important to knowledge and what you do with knowledge. And its purpose can be very broad. As we know, knowledge is, there's so much different types of knowledge, and we're specifically in this class going to be limiting ourselves to particular types. In fact, particular types of fardain even, not all of the fardains that there possibly are. So it's a very important thing to know what you're wanting to do with it and what you intend to get out of it. And I just wanted to share that. So for myself, when I was doing this and here today, just as a reminder for myself, is that the purpose I had in taking the class was to help better my knowledge in terms of leading my family. And that is, for one type of obligation that we have as a fardain. But in doing so, it's been something that I've noticed has not just helped me in terms of my family, but it's helped me understand, I think, what some of you were saying about learning that life experiences that you gain, some of that knowledge, will help you down the road, or you have a new perspective on things that have happened beforehand after you attain some knowledge. So this has been good for me. One of the things I've been doing particularly in this, and getting ready for this class, was realizing that, as a convert, this is, I think, my 7th Ramadan that I'll be going into, and looking back at my previous Ramadans, I'm like, wow, there's so much that I didn't know about this holy month of Ramadan. So, alhamdulillah. Inshallah, we all learn and we all benefit from this reminder. This here is a quote. The purpose of ilm, which is the Arabic term for knowledge, is to save ourselves and our families from the fire. And this is the definition that was given to us by our sheikh who was teaching the class. Alhamdulillah. And so this is a very important thing to remember as well, that we use knowledge for the purpose of bettering ourselves. I think, like you said, Sister Elizabeth, to better ourselves, but also particularly for the case of what comes after this life, for the fire, to free ourselves from the fire, inshallah. So there are 3 different levels to knowledge. I'm just going to go over these very briefly, just to give you an overview. There's a lot of what this today is going to be kind of introductory stuff, and broad aspect knowledge, so that you kind of understand the full scope of what there is in terms of this study, and then we will narrow ourselves further and further as we go throughout this, and especially the next coming weeks. But this is the basic type that we're going to be looking at, is groups of masalas. A masala is an informative statement with evidence. And this is the common thing that you will read in books of fiqh, it's particularly introductory texts. The Ashmawiyah, the Arabic text for this class, that's all it is. It's just masalas. Just basic first level type of knowledge. In many texts, what you will find is that they actually leave off the second part of this statement. It'll be just the informative statement, and it won't even give you the evidence. It's a very common thing, particularly in terms of fatwa books. Books of fatwa, they usually just give the informative statement, which is a type of masala, and they leave off the evidence. So just something to be aware of. So masalas and those who are capable of delivering them, like in terms of a fatwa, that'd be like from a mufti. Those who are at a higher level understand. They understand what is called groups of principles, which generally derive from different schools, which we'll look at here in a minute. So it's the groups of principles to which the masalas return. So all the masalas are coming back to a core group of principles of how they're interpreting the Sharia, the divine law of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then beyond that is the full mastery, or intuition or mastery, which is a state which allows one to craft a masala. And this is arguably only reserved for the scholars of the past. It's hard to even say with certainty that we have people today who are at this level, sadly. And that is something that the Prophet, he did advise us, is that as time progressed towards the end of days, scholars would become fewer and fewer. So we should hold tight to those that we have, and alhamdulillah, we have some wonderful elders who have, like we were talking about, the experiential knowledge here in this community. And we do have a few scholars as well. They tend to be hidden, but they are scholars among us. Alhamdulillah. Pathways to knowledge. A very important one is reading. Increasing your knowledge can come through reading. And so one of the primary commands we have in the Quran is ikra, right? To read. It also is recite, but it is primarily known as to read too. And this can be in the form of the Quran, of course, but it can also be in the form of reading other books from the scholars, books of any type, particularly. We can even branch outside Islam for our understanding of this. But reading is an extremely important thing. And in terms of reading, reading can also be reading of our surroundings. Readings can be with the eyes, it can be with the other senses, not just through reading of text. So becoming aware of what we observe. I'll actually jump down to this beforehand. This can really go into some of these other statements here. Following a sheikh or a scholar who you understand and who himself understands. This is an important thing for someone that you are hoping to follow and learn from. you want to be able to understand them. It's hard for one to understand, say, if you're, just give an example. If you're from Germany, you only speak German, and you're coming to America to learn, and the Americans only speak English. You're going to have a language barrier. It's not going to be easy for you to understand the person that you're trying to learn from. We have this very common in, I think, revert culture, but also in terms of Islam and its vastness throughout the world. That Islam is primarily an Arab language culture. But mashallah, it has spread itself throughout the centuries to all regions of the planet. SubhanAllah. And you can see in that, as cultures evolve, as Islam spreads throughout North Africa, it evolves into the culture of its place and its time, up into Andalusia, even takes on its own element. Going east towards China, you see Islam pass into Persia and expand and change and take on Urdu. And we have so much Islamic Urdu poetry that has evolved over time. And going even beyond into Southeast Asia, some up into China. Muslims made it even as far as Japan. SubhanAllah. So, just understanding that who you pick to be your guide into the religion is going to be a very important thing. Making sure that relationship that you're able to follow along with them is key. On the other part, making sure that they also are a good person, that they understand what they are teaching. There are many people that learn knowledge but have not truly learned. That they may learn how to read a text and to give it back to you, but they are themselves not necessarily practicing. May inshallah we all be among those who are practicing, so that we can teach others, particularly our children. I think it's an important thing, as they will be the ones who take us immediately as upon their sheikh, right? SubhanAllah, SubhanAllah. And then patience. Let me just jump to that as well, because this is very important. It takes time. This scholar that I've been with for some time in Cairo, he has many people that come and ask him, how long will it take for me to get an ijazah? How long will it take for me to become a mufti? And the amount of people that ask him is embarrassing sometimes, because he has to keep telling them, look, this is something that takes a long time. You have to develop a relationship with your teacher, and maybe that'll take a course of 6 months, but usually it takes the course of multiple years. And you can read through a text with someone in just a few months sometimes. Some of the more advanced texts can take some time, but the time involved in learning knowledge. I mean, knowledge is supposed to be what? From the cradle to the grave, right? So it is one that is the breadth of our entire lifetime span, and we may never even hope to learn a portion of all that there is to know. I know the famous scientist Albert Einstein, he once said that mankind uses maybe 10 to 15% of their actual brain capacity. And imagine if we actually used all of it, what we would be able to accomplish as human beings. So this, I think, pays great respect to the fact that patience, in terms of learning, even learning Islam, is something that we need to take. And we can take that upon ourselves as well. Be patient with ourselves as we learn. Don't try to rush in. Don't try to learn too much at once. Don't overwhelm oneself. Be patient with yourself as well in this, because it is something that is not supposed to be instantaneous. We're not supposed to be, wake up one morning and mashallah, I'm imam today and I can run the community. And no, this does not happen. SubhanAllah. It takes time to develop these things.
I barely run my prayer life, let alone a community.
Yes, exactly, right? Yeah. SubhanAllah. Categories of knowledge. There are a few categories just to go over. Basically, it breaks down into 3 that you can divide things into. Objective knowledge. This is what we're talking about today. Fiqh, primarily. But can also include things like aqidah, tasawwuf, or tazkiyah is another word for that. Source knowledge, where things actually ultimately come back to, right? Sunnah, Quran, primary text. And then instrumental knowledge, very important as well. Rational sciences, things like logic, rhetoric, and linguistic sciences, very much Arabic, the language itself, and then grammar significantly so. Oh, all right. And now this is what we're going to have for today, our foundations. So in the Al-Azhar curriculum, which is one of the oldest curriculums in terms of Islamic sciences and education, I guess that would be the way to put it in terms of Islamic education, holds that there are 10 foundational principles for every science. And they're always the same principles, but for each science, of course, they have their own aspect of how they turn out. So we're going to look today at the 10 foundational principles of Islamic sciences in regards to fiqh. And so these are the principles. It's the definition, the subject, the originator, the sources, the ruling, the benefits, the names, its association in terms of other sciences, its virtue, and its scope. And I am going to ask, if at all possible, write down your questions and hold them till the end, just because there's so much that we're going to try to cover, and we're going to try to finish, InshaAllah, before Isha. So keep your questions till the end, and then we'll try to answer everything then, InshaAllah. Okay? All right, so 10 foundations of fiqh. Number 1, the definition. So the definition has 2 parts. It's linguistic definition, and then there's also the Shari definition, which is the divine, that Sharia law is the divine law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the divine kind of definition from Allah. We have more based off of the Quran. So linguistically, fiqh is understanding. It is kind of as we started class today, what we know. And then the Shari definition is knowledge of physical actions that is acquired from specific proofs. And going back to what we said about the maslas, right? It's a statement here in the case of this time. We're talking particularly statements of action, physical action, active statements. And then, of course, our proofs. Ultimately, as we get to the sources, you'll see where these proofs come from. So, okay, I do have a question. When discussing fiqh, are all of the rulings based on certainty? What do you guys think?
I don't think so.
No? Why not?
So I would think that maybe things change from the early times of faith, how.
Because things change, okay.
Yeah, so maybe
Yeah.
there's room for not to change it, but to alter it.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but.
Anyone want to challenge Johannes to that?
Can I ask a question, Ramadan?
Go ahead. We're gonna. This is a question time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, is there a precedent that has to be upheld? Are we talking about upholding previous precedents? When we talk about fiqh, like previous rulings that we base our understanding, or can it be challenged by something that is outside of that precedent, making a distinction that changes the certainty of what normally would be the ruling?
I'm going to try to make it more easy, more simple. That's great, and I think we're going to answer your question later on.
Okay.
But just for the purpose of this, going back to the definition of fiqh in terms of understanding, is all of our statements about understanding of action based on certainty? No. Johannes, it's
No,
correct. Yeah.
I'm shaking my head because I still don't understand the
Okay.
question, I think.
Okay. Well, hold your question,
Okay.
and we'll see if, as we go through it, it answers itself or not. Okay? Inshallah, inshallah. Johannes, you are correct. The answer is no. We do not have everything based off of certainty, and the primary reason for that is a term called ijtihad. Okay? Now, I want to follow back to what you said, because an important thing to notice here is that when we're talking about certainty, and this can be kind of a scary thing sometimes, we're talking about divine commands, right?
Yeah.
So, and, you know, Imam says this very well, and I'll try to paraphrase what he says, is that when we're talking about the Sharia law, we're talking about something that is unchangeable. This is the divine law, it's been from day one, and it does not change. When we're talking about fiqh, we're talking about man's interpretation of that.
Yeah.
And that, as you said, perhaps can change.
Right.
Yeah.
That answered my question.
That did great.
Yes.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. So ijtihad is the primary way how that works, and ijtihad is independent thinking. Independent thinking can replace the specific proofs when there is no specific proof for something. And this particularly happens as cultures advance. We have technology today. This is something that did not exist at the time of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. He did not give us any masalas, any rulings about technology. It's not in the Quran, it's not in the Sunnah. So scholars on their own have applied ijtihad in order to address some of the questions with technology that we have today. Just as an example. Okay? And ijtihad, this is something that can only be used by those who have mastered the science. Okay? And we talked about the three kind of levels of understanding. Those who can just going off of masalas, which is all we're going to be able to do. Those who look in terms of broader principles, starting to follow a school, understand the logic and the methodology of the school, and then those who have mastered the entire science itself. Okay, so ijtihad is only by those who have mastered the science, and there are very few of those people. Okay. All right, moving on to the subject. The subject is the speech of Allah that is connected with the actions that we take. Okay. So very important is that it is action related, and that's going to cover our scope. So the scope here, fiqh is not concerned with researching the essence of things. We're not so much interested in the deep dived why behind it so much, other than the action form, okay, the active form. And this is primarily to separate it from the science of aqidah. Okay, that's the theology. Fiqh is concerned with actions, whereas in terms of going into the essence, now we're more talking about the belief of things, and that is separate science itself, the science of aqidah. Okay, just to give you some examples here. Here's a masala: the Prophet's lying is haram. Is that a statement of fiqh or a statement of aqidah?
I guess it's Akida.
Aqidah? So this one is actually a statement of fiqh. So lying is an action. And so with that, we have a fiqh answer. It's given a designation of being something that is haram, impermissible. Okay? The other statement here, the belief of the Prophet's lying is impossible. That one is a statement of aqidah. Kind of say they're both basically saying the same thing, but they're saying it in different ways.
Right.
And that categorizes them of how you phrase it. Are you phrasing it in terms of theology, or are you phrasing it in terms of the action? belief versus action. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Awesome. All right. The name. So this is the science of fiqh. So usul al-fiqh in Arabic is what this is called. Sometimes it is also called the science of branches. Usul al-furuq, right? Yeah. And the reason for that is, as we go into its association, fiqh comes from the narrated sciences in terms of its transmission, but it is from the branches and not the foundations. So, because fiqh itself owes itself to source material for deriving the masalas, the rulings, right? Then it is from the branches, whereas something like, say, the science of hadith, this is something that's just from the foundations. And fiqh obviously uses things like the hadith for the sunnah and Quran, of course. That would be another foundational science. Okay? All right. And the originator. You want to tell me, give a guess as to who the originator of this is?
The fuqaha.
Say again?
The fuqaha.
The
like
fuqaha?
Abu Hanifa, Malik.
Good answer. It's partially included here, but it's not the originator.
The Prophet.
The
Muhammad.
Prophet,
The Prophet.
Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes, alhamdulillah. The Prophet himself is the originator of this, and we can see this in a couple places. For one, he's the one who is receiving the Sharia. He was the divine vessel of receiving the Quran, which has in it the Sharia, the divine laws from God. And this, of course, gets revealed over the course of, 32 years, during Mecca and Medina. During this time, we actually can see an evolution, to a degree, of how fiqh is developing during the Prophet's own lifetime. During the time in Mecca, it's primarily related to things about relationships, and a tiny bit of interaction with society, not much. But it's primarily in terms of your worship. Things like your purification, the salah, fasting, things like that. Those are all things that, well, fasting for the month of Ramadan wasn't until Medina, but a lot of it all originates for that part in Mecca. When they go to Medina, it broadens out dramatically, because now, as a society, these questions are starting to form. Okay, what do we do in this situation? What do we do in this situation? And so Allah and the Prophet are in communication about how do we do these things, and then sometimes the Prophet would actually make a judgment, and we see this a couple times. Particularly important one right after Badr, the Prophet makes some decisions on his own, and then Allah corrects him. And then other times the Prophet, the main situation would be that the Prophet, he would receive a question and he would wait to give an answer. This is very common. We see this particularly at the end of Surah Tawbah, right? Very famous part right there. So, Rasulullah is the primary originator. You can kind of divide the history, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of that, into 5 periods. The time of the Prophet, the time of the rightly guided caliphs. Who can name the rightly guided caliphs? Yes.
Abu Bakr,
Abu Bakr, yeah.
Omar,
Omar,
Ali,
Ali,
Uthman.
Uthman. Yes. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. So during the time of Uthman, there was a very significant event that happened. Does anyone know what that was?
Is it the trench?
Was the
Is that the
Quran
trench?
The Quran.
collecting the Quran?
Yes,
Sorry.
yes, the Mus'haf was created. Yes. So the Mus'haf was created, and 6 copies were sent to different cities throughout the Muslim world of that time. And those were Mecca, Medina, Kufa, Basra, Sham, kind of the Damascus region, and Misr, Egypt, primary region around being Alexandria and Cairo, there along the upper Nile Delta.
The first copy of the Quran is what you said.
Yes, yeah, and so with those copies of the Quran, those Mus'hafs that were created from the original ones, which were created from the fragments of everyone having written them down during the time of the Prophet, were sent out with scholars to all of these different regions of the Islamic world. And from those scholars, the formation of more ijtihad, as we were talking about, right? The independent reasoning to solve for issues that were developing, because the Prophet's passed on now. We don't have exact guidance from the Prophet,
Right.
so we're developing, and it's kind of evolving fluidly. And it all happens in these particular 6 cities, right, during the time there after Uthman, subhanAllah. And that leads to the Mujahid Imams, the 4 Imams. They start coming 4 generations after the Prophet, right after the time of the Tabi'in, with Imam Malik in Medina, Abu Hanifa, roughly around the exact same time in Kufa, Imam al-Shafi, who was a student of Imam Malik and also studied under Abu Hanifa, and then went off on his own to Egypt and Misr. And then Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who also studied under, I think, he didn't study under Imam Malik, but he studied under Shafi and Abu Hanifa briefly when he was young. SubhanAllah. And then his in school, formulating around in Baghdad.
Ahmed bin Hanbal.
Yeah.
Ahmed bin Hanbal.
Alhamdulillah. So these are the 4 Mujahid Imams, which are the originators of the 4 Islamic schools of Sunni jurisprudence, the 4 madahibs, Maliki, Hanafi, Shafi'i, and Hanbali. And all of these are the orthodox Sunni Islam schools of law, legislation that we have today. SubhanAllah. And then the codification of the madahib, of Sunni Islam. This happened roughly about 3 generations after each of these by their students, collecting all of their texts and their narrations from their teachers and putting them together into different books, which then became kind of the foundational books for those schools, passed down throughout time. And then as time goes on, it's a few generations down, and you get a great scholar that comes along, and he's writing this commentary on the previous generation's main textbook. And then it keeps expanding, and in a few more generations you have a commentary on the commentary on the commentary. It keeps going. And then the ta'aliq, which is kind of the closing. There's a strong opinion among the scholars that the gate of ijtihad closed roughly around the 6th century after the Prophet. And that
Italy was closed?
that at that time, kind of the consensus is that the schools are completely formulated by this time, and they are what they are. We should not be trying to change the schools anymore, and there really isn't going to.
That's enough. Okay.
Yeah, it was more so because the schools themselves had stopped evolving. They had completely codified and come around to their consensus as to what the methodology of each school was teaching, and it was roughly around that time. SubhanAllah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, back then, when these 4 imams got started, were they defining their madhab as like that's a madhab, or they were just people who has opinions back then?
Yes. It's hard to say that they thought of themselves as madhabs. For Imam Malik and Abu Hanifa particularly, it was more for them what they were practicing and what they were giving rulings on was based largely on the community that they were living in, which was very large centers of Sahaba and Tabi'in. Imam Malik, coming from Medina himself, the Maliki madhab is often known as the Usul of Medina. It's the school of the city of the Prophet. And likewise for Abu Hanifa, he was from Kufa, which was one of the next great places, right? The Caliph Omar, his family migrates to Kufa. And so there's a lot of scholars. Ibn Masud, one of Abu Hanifa's teachers, very strong tabi'in. Abu Hanifa's school is also kind of known as the school of Kufa in that degree. Imam Shafi is the one who's kind of first known as the father of fiqh because what he does is he kind of combines Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik's into his own school, which he starts in when he kind of settles in Egypt, and then Imam Hanbal, having learned with so many of the others, and then him being also himself a master of hadith science, developed his own school in his own travels, kind of separately. So, yeah, it's based off of methodology, but that methodology was primarily related to the cultures that they were living among, which was different collectives of the generations following the companions. Yeah. And just also kind of to expound upon that, the book that we're studying, the Ashmoya, and then as well the Being Muslim book. These primarily come.
Ashma, you copied that, or how did you get a copy of that?
I will get copies. If you want a copy, just let me know. Would you want the Arabic text or the English text?
English text.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually have Arabic and English both available at the Ashmoya. But these come from the school of Imam Malik. So it's the school kind of developing around the companions living in the city of Medina.
It's called Being Muslim?
Yes, the Being Muslim is the English text, big compilation text, and then the Nashmuya, Arabic and English, copies of that. All right. One term that I was saying was consensus, right? Ijma is consensus, and this is kind of an important thing. You will find this time and time that this is kind of how the schools developed as well, is you'd have consensus around a different methodology or an opinion within that methodology developing. So differences of opinion among the fuqaha, the scholars of fiqh, formed around source methodologies used to interpret the sunnah and the practices of the sahaba. And ijma within and between madhab can differ because of that. They're using slightly different source methodologies. Okay?
No, we're trying to get used to interpret the sunnah and the practices of the Sahaba.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you will find subtle differences between, say, the school of Imam Shafi and the school of Abu Hanifa. All of them, in terms of what we're actually covering for this class, the fard ayn, all of the fards will be nearly identical. You may have one or two where they'll consider something to be obligatory, and another school will consider it to be a sunnah, or one school will consider it to be a sunnah, and another school could be obligatory. But it's very few. For the most part, across the board, within all four of the schools of the Islamic sciences of fiqh, it's exactly the same. So, and that's what we're going to limit ourselves to here in this class. So the source material, the Quran, the Sunnah, the primary text, the usul, which is the methodology used in that school, right? And we talked about how in Abu Hanifa it was this kind of the methodology that was from the scholars that had been sent to Kufa. Same thing with Imam Malik's in Medina. Imam Shafi kind of balanced his between the two, and then Imam Hanbal used his knowledge as well as also an expert in hadith, in that source material, right, to further develop it into another methodology. And then, of course, the text of all of those imams, mujahid imams, are primary sources, and all of the other texts coming down are derivative works or owing to themselves. Yeah.
So were these imams like writing their own books back then, or they were just teaching?
The
people?
only one that did not write his own book is actually, or at least we don't have a copy of it, is Imam Abu Hanifa. We have the Muwatta from Imam Malik. We have I'm going to blank on the text from Imam Shafi. And then Imam Hanbal's text is I'm going to blank on the name of it as well. But they did have a text in their schools. I should have put those up on the slide. My apologies. So yeah, they did. It's a really cool thing, and we have copies. The Muwatta is probably the one we have the most copies of, which is really beautiful. And it's a very difficult text to read because it's so old, and it's surprisingly a really cool thing in terms of if you're looking in terms of beyond Islam here in kind of, you would say, more Orientalist sciences, the study of religious source texts. The Muwatta, along with some of the early source texts of the Quran, are surprisingly more accurate in terms of the chains of transmission coming down, and earlier dating to when their originals at the time of the authors than anything in any other religion. SubhanAllah. It's absolutely amazing. You'll hear Christians talk forever about how accurate their texts are, and Jews will say the same thing.
Right.
Does not even come close to comparing with what we have in terms of our original source texts for hadith, for the Quran itself, and for the sciences of fiqh. SubhanAllah. It's absolutely amazing what we have. And this is just an example here in terms of levels of fiqh in terms of studying in one of the madhabs, Maliki madhab, which our text here is from. Ashmawi is a very introductory text, very down here at the bottom. Ibn Asher's is a little bit more advanced. And I just want to note one thing on this is that the Ashmawi, all it's covering is what we're talking about in our class. Just the basics of Fardaim, which is fiqh for purification, salah, and fasting. That's it. And you might instantly think, wait, that's only 3 of the 5 pillars of Islam, right? The reason the other 2 aren't included, and in here they are included in the next book up, Ibn Asher, Zakat and Hajj, right? Is because not everyone is eligible to go on those. Not everyone is financially eligible to pay zakat. Not everyone is financially eligible to be able to participate in going on Hajj. And so the scholars separated them in how they taught, and they wouldn't include zakat and Hajj in terms of fard ayn because they're not obligatory upon every Muslim. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. If you go back up into kind of stepping up the ladder here, you've got the Risala next, and then the Muqtasir of Imam Khalil and Ibn al-Hajjaj. And these are all commentaries on the Muwatta, which is Imam Malik's text. The next foundation is the ruling. So every science has kind of its own legal ruling, and the important thing here is that fiqh is the primary obligation for everything that the mukallaf wants to do. Does anyone know what a mukallaf is? I'm going to jump ahead real quick to what is a mukallaf. Mukallaf is any morally accountable person. Any morally accountable person. There's 3 conditions for it. Being of sound mind. Reaching the age of purity. And receiving word of Islam. So having been given da'wah actually does qualify you. If you've never heard of Islam, and this is a beautiful thing because we have brothers in our community in multiple different areas that go and they share Islam. And this is spreading the obligations upon people, first and foremost, to become Muslim after you've heard it. And then secondarily, to learn Islam and what is obligatory upon oneself, which is the fard ayn, which we're going to be covering over the course of this class. SubhanAllah. So going back. Primary obligation for everything that a mukallaf, someone who is of sound mind, has reached puberty, and has heard the word of Islam, has received the dawah, more beyond the primary obligations is considered a communal obligation. So not everyone is required to go on Hajj if you're not eligible to. If you don't have the financial capability or even the physical capability to do that. So not everyone has to know the rulings for going on Hajj. Now, it is definitely a benefit. Last year myself, I actually was like, you know what? I don't know the rulings on Hajj. I really want to learn them. So I spent about 3 months studying Hajj, and it was amazing. I learned so much good stuff that I actually found benefit for in my own life, just day to day, without even having gone on Hajj. It was excellent. But it's not an obligation. It's not something that is required. The things that are required are like what we were discussing, the fard ains, the purification, the salah, and the fasting, the saum. Alright. The virtue. The virtue of fiqh. Virtue is known by the nature of its subject, and the subject is the actions of the mukallaf. The virtue is thus high because it deals with everything that the mukallaf does in their life. So one thing that my teachers encourage is that when you're wanting to go do something, anything in life, you should find out what Islam has to say about it. Because it does. Islam is a holistic way of it covers everything in one's life. Allah's divine law covers everything in our lives. So we should always be asking ourselves, what does Allah guide me for in this, right? We actually say this in the Surah Al-Fatiha that we recite at the beginning of all of our prayers, right? Guide me to the straight path. Just break that down into that guidance that we get from Allah. We should always be looking for that in whatever it is that we're doing. SubhanAllah. Imam Shatibi has this beautiful quote. The Sharia was revealed to take the human out of his lower callings, to make him a slave of Allah by his own choice, just as he is against his will. So we are naturally the slaves, the servants of Allah, by divine decree. That is the determined nature of how things are from before we even came into this world. We are the subjects, the creations of the Creator. And the law has been revealed in order to help us in that state of purification, right? To be able to help us distinguish what in ourselves is something of our nafs and what is actually something of our ruh, our self, versus our soul, right? SubhanAllah. Beautiful statement from this Imam. The benefit, similar, but the benefit is correcting actions to be in compliance with one's ruling. So the virtue is talking about what the actual kind of merits of it are, and the benefit is what we can actually receive itself, just to help distinguish those two. So correcting actions to be in compliance with Allah's rulings. And may we all, InshaAllah, become better, more practicing, and our worship be more secure, right? Inshallah. So just to review, what is a masala? Who can tell me what a masala is? This is what we started out with today.
It's an informative statement that has evidence.
MashaAllah, that's right. It's an informative statement with evidence. Or in other words, it's a legal ruling. Okay? And that's the definition. So when you're reading like Being Muslim book here, it doesn't have all the Arabic words. When it does, it clearly translates them, but for the most time, it's using English. Legal ruling is how they define legal ruling, the masala. Okay? If you're reading closer to literal translation of a text, it's probably going to use the word masala instead. It's just going to transliterate it instead of translate it into something else. So I just wanted to make sure we all understood what this was, just going back and forth between these. Masalas themselves can further be classified as either fard ain, individual, or fard kifaya, communal. Okay? And there are 5 categories of types of actions. Again, we're going to be sticking with the fards here. That's the top one. So example of a fard, fasting in Ramadan. Right? Below that, you have that as what is recommended. Let me just give the Arabic for these as well. Mustahab, right? Tarawih prayers. This is kind of one of the famous things that happens during Ramadan, other than the fasting itself. Iftar is probably as well. But Tarawih is not obligatory. It is definitely recommended, but it is not obligatory. In fact, one thing that should be noted is that if one has missed prayers, it is actually an obligation to make up those prayers before doing Tarawih. So if that is something that has happened, and for some of us that can be the case, please try to prioritize what is obligatory over what is recommended. As beautiful as it is to come to the congregation and to pray the Tarawih, and there are different ways of doing the Tarawih, but making up missed prayers is a fard ain. It is an obligation over that of the Tarawih for Ramadan. The third level down, that is what is permissible, okay? And that's the mubah. So for the mubah, the permissible things, eating your best dessert after iftar. That's an example of something that is permissible. And just to give kind of an example here in terms of the legal aspects, obligatory is an action that one is rewarded for doing. However, if one does not do it, then one is deserving of punishment, regardless of whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most forgiving, punishes them or forgives them. Those things that are recommended, the mustahab, those actions are those that one is rewarded for doing, but is not punished if you depart from doing them. Although many scholars will say that once you start doing a sunnah, that's another word for it, the recommended things, the sunnahs. Once one starts doing the sunnahs, the recommended actions, one should do their best not to depart from doing them. Although one would not incur a sin for that. That was permissible, just simply that's what's permissible. There's no reward for it, there's nothing against you for doing it. That which is disliked. Example again, eating with your left hand as opposed to your right hand. These are things that are fine, it's okay, it's just the Prophet didn't do them, so we consider them things that are just not encouraged for the most part. And these are an action that one is rewarded for not doing, but not punished for doing. And then the last thing is that which is impermissible. Those are the things which are haram. Example again with that would be definitely taking a sip of water during the day of Ramadan when you're fasting, which is actually breaking your fast, which during Ramadan is obligatory to fast. So that which is impermissible, which is haram, is an action that one is rewarded for leaving and deserving punishment if one does. That actually is perfect for our timing, because we're getting the adhan coming in for Isha. Subhanallah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. I will stay after the Salah as well for some questions. If you guys did write down some questions or had some things into your mind. And we'll continue again next week, jumping right in. And I will bring copies for everyone, so you can have those. And we'll start next week straight up with the purification of Tahara. SubhanAllah. Jazakallah khair for being here. May Allah reward you for being here, for participating, inshallah. May He bless you with the knowledge. May you be able to increase in knowledge. Indeed.
That was fascinating. It is fascinating. Thank you very much for your
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.